We Europeans are the civilized ones, and for us, the Chinese are barbarians. This is what civilization has done to barbarism. Before the Opium Wars, both the British Empire as well as the Chinese dynasty believed themselves as the divine embodiment of a great civilization. Towards the end of the 18th century, a trade division between China and Britain reached a critical point. Britain, having imported too many luxury goods unavailable to the British mainland, caused money to flow out of the nation. To make matters worse, the British were unable to properly trade the Chinese due to the Canton system, which restricted foreign trade to a single port. These tensions finally ruptured into action when the British government was put under pressure by its own people and treasury to increase its trade. There were many reasons why the British government seeked to increase trade with the Chinese. However, there are three main reasons. First, the British loved tea, an import from China, as well as other items such as silk, which were harder to obtain due to restrictions. Second, the British vaults were nearly empty. They just came out of a war and greatly needed money. And finally, not only were they nearly bankrupt, they also lost one of their largest sources of income, the American colonies. Pressured by these reasons, the British seek to remedy these political and economical issues by appealing to the Chinese to increase trade, loosen laws, open more ports, among others, which were all flatly rejected. And they were also not only accompanied by a rejection, but also accompanied by a letter from the Chinese emperor to the British king, of which ridiculed the British government as well as the king himself, calling the diplomatic mission as nothing more than a tribute mission. The denial of negotiations, along with the letter, deeply irritated the British government. Not only were they denied all of their terms, it was obvious to them the Chinese saw them as incompetent. The demand for trade only increased further when the British treasury dried up more and more with the conquest of India, leaving them broke and short on manpower. Desperate, the Honorable East India Company turned to another source, opium. Opium sold well in China, was easy to make, and also easily grew in the form of poppies. However, it was illegalized by the Chinese government, and so, needing money, the Honorable East India Company decided to smuggle and ignore all operations including opium, massively irritating the Chinese government. In response to these actions, the Chinese government dispatched an officer named Lin Zenshu to take care of the opium epidemic. Lin Zenshu decided to tackle the opium trade by sealing off from the source, so he gathered a group of local peasants at the southwestern border of China, confiscated all opium, and destroyed all of it with lime at Human, forcing addicts into rehabilitation as well as arresting dozens on charges of smuggling. This course of action angered the British greatly as the amount of opium destroyed was not only worth millions, but the Chinese government also took away a major chunk of its consumer base. The British government decided that the time for diplomacy was over. The government then initiated the war, a more forceful form of diplomacy where the British landed naval ships and troops near China and began attacking, kickstarting the Opium Wars.
A series of battles proved that the British far outclassed the Chinese land army and navy in every single way. British troops were disciplined, well-trained, and equipped with more technologically advanced weapons. Steam ironclad ships such as the HMS Nemesis had just been sent to China as a test run of its power. This led to a completely one-sided battle as the British defeated the Chinese forces that outnumbered them 14-1 at times. And finally, the emperor realized the threat of the British military and dismissed Lin Zenshu, replaced them with another man named Qi Shan. Qi Shan negotiated peace terms with Sir Eliot, the leader of the British campaign in China. After much debate, it was decided that the Chinese would pay £6 million for the destroyed opium, and the British would receive Hong Kong. In return, the British would give up all land and garrisons that it had captured during its military campaign in China. However, neither the Daoguang Emperor nor the British signed the treaty in the end. Each of them thought that they could have gotten better terms. Both officials from both sides, Lin Zenshu and Qi Shan, were dismissed afterwards. Peace at a standstill, war resumed once more. Chinese forts quickly fell as land of troops came nearer to the city of Beijing. British ships were sent up the Yangtze River, threatening to siege Beijing. Faced with loss, the Chinese then attempted to establish a peaceful diplomatic contact once more and agreed on the treaty, relenting on nearly all things but legalizing opium and the expansion of Christian missionaries. The Chinese gave up £21 million to the British and seceded Hong Kong, stationed British consulates into the government, unrestricted trade, and debated tariff rates. In the 1900s, the Qing dynasty, also known as the Qing government, faced the Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion was a political and religious uprising in the 19th century which lasted 14 years, took 17 provinces, and 20 million lives. Amidst the chaos, the British took the opportunity to renew hostilities with the Chinese due to several Chinese violations as well as several costly bellies. In early October 1856, Chinese officials and the Guangzhou police boarded the British ship registered Arrow while it was docked in Canton, arresting sailors on the charge of smuggling. Though the sailors were later released, the British government accused the Chinese government of lowering the British flag on the ship. Under this costly belly, the British declared war. In the same month of 1856, around a month after the incident with the British registered ship Arrow, a British warship sailed up the Pearl River and began the shelling of the city Canton. The Chinese and the British then fought to a stalemate. Trading ceased as the fight continued to grow. The war only intensified by the actions of both sides, such as in December, Chinese burned a trading warehouse along with several other foreign factories. Hearing of the British success, the French joined forces with the British in its siege of China under the cover-up of a murder of a French missionary inside of China in the year of 1856. The external forces began an assault on China in late 1857. Though delayed by having to amass troops from India and the British mainland, their forces targeted Canton and took it over, replacing the governor of Canton with a more trustworthy British official.
After preparing, the Allies continued the military conquest. The British and French troops reached Tianjin with British warships in May 1858. They forced the Chinese government to sign treaties and held conferences in which 4 treaties were signed. The treaties of Tianjin, signed in June 1858, forced the Chinese to provide housing for foreign envoys in Beijing, the right for foreign travel in the center of China, the opening of new ports to Western trade, housing, and the freedom of Christian missionary movements. The trade of opium was finally legalized later in a conference during the time of 1858 at Shanghai. This treaty was one of many considered by the Chinese as the unequal treaties. With the opium trade legalized in the summer of 1858, the British started to withdraw but returned once again in June 1859, followed by French and British diplomats to confirm and enforce the treaties. They proceeded to follow a route through the Han River, passing the Dagu Forest to Beijing. However, the Chinese refused to let them pass through the Han River, instead negotiated a different route to Beijing. The Allied forces refused to take the other route and tried to forcefully go through the Dagu forts. The Chinese forces at the fort then resisted and drove back the British and French, causing them severe casualties. The Chinese refused to endorse the treaties, causing fighting to ensue once again. A large force of British warships and the Allied troops from the French destroyed the Dagu batteries in 1860. The military conquest proceeded up the Han River to Tianjin. In October, they successfully captured and pillaged Beijing. They then burned the emperor's summer place, the Yuanming Garden. Later in the same month, the Chinese were forced to sign the Beijing Convention. This forced the Chinese to accept the treaties of Tianjin and gave up the southern area of the Kowloon Peninsula. The Opium War too expanded Western influence in China and damaged the Chinese dynastic system, which caused uprising and rebellions. What was once a weak country, long behind the times in both economy and technology, became one of the leading countries, able to stand against even the most powerful nations simply due to a diplomatic disagreement and a few poppies.